There's a moment in Obsession where Bear finds out Nikki is fully awake, fully conscious, trapped inside her own body, screaming where no one can hear her, and he chooses to keep going. That's the scene that defines this film. Because here's the question Curry Baker actually wants you to answer. 15 minutes earlier, did you like Bear? Because I did. Curry Baker directed this film at 20 years old. Now, let that sink in for just a second. 20 years old. And the choice he made to spend the entire first act making Bear a sympathetic protagonist doesn't make that a beginner decision. That's a deliberate trap. Bear is lonely, he's awkward, and he sees something in Nikki and he locks onto it. The Wish Willow ritual is framed as a desperate act from someone who doesn't know how to connect with another person.
One wish, Willow. You only get one wish. I wish Nikki Freeman loved me more than anyone in the entire world.
You're supposed to recognize that impulse, not approve of it. Just recognize it.
Nikki, wait. I was gonna ask you,
What?
I lost my train of thought.
I...
Good night. What else? Why?
And let's face it, at one point or another in our lives, we've all wished for that one person to recognize us, to like us, and maybe even fall for us. And that's what Barker is doing. He's giving you just enough of Bear's internal logic to make you understand his decision before you understand what that decision costs. And then the possession happens, and then everything shifts. Here's what makes this film technically terrifying. And when I say technically, that's because this is a craft decision. It's not by accident. Barker splits Nikki into two performances. There's the Nikki that Bear sees, which is responsive, present, and apparently willing. And then there's the real Nikki, who's conscious, trapped, screaming inside a body she can no longer control. The camera knows which Nikki is real. The audience knows. Bear does not at first, but then he finds out. And he keeps going. This is not a horror film about a supernatural entity. This is a horror film about what happens when a man decides his desire is more important than someone else's reality. The Wish Willow is almost irrelevant, okay? The possession is almost irrelevant. Those are just the mechanisms. Bear is the monster. There's a comment online with over 10,000 likes on this film, which says it better than most critics. The comment says, he knows what's happening to her, but he's too selfish to care. That's it. That's the whole movie. Now, why does this hit harder in a horror context than it would in a standard thriller? Why does framing this as a possession make it more disturbing than if Barker had just shot a stalker film? You know why? It's because horror gives you permission to hope that it's not real. A straight thriller, you're watching human behavior. Horror adds the possibility of something supernatural. You keep waiting for the demonic entity to arrive and take responsibility. The problem is that it never does. The monster is Bear, and it will always be Bear. If you've made it this far into the video and you like what I'm talking about, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button so you get all your horror content, reviews, and recommendations from me. But let's keep going. I want to make one thing clear, okay? Is that Bear isn't unique in the horror history as a villain. What makes him unique is the mechanism, the way Barker builds complicity before revealing the cost. As most of you that are subscribed to this channel know, I design haunted attractions for a living. I've spent years studying how environments manipulate emotional response. What makes a person lean in? What makes them shut down? What makes them feel something they didn't expect to feel? What Barker is doing in the first act is the oldest trick in the design playbook. It puts audiences inside the perspective of the person experiencing the environment. Bear's loneliness, his fixation on Nikki. And you're not meant to approve of it. You're meant to follow the emotional logic. And once you follow his logic far enough, you've already agreed to the frame. You're already inside the trap. Because as most of you know, real dread doesn't announce itself. Real dread builds and it accumulates. By the time you understand what Bear is, you've already spent 45 minutes inside his head. That's not horror making you scared of something external. That's horror making you uncomfortable with your own willingness to empathize. That is Barker's achievement. And at 20 years old, that's not just impressive, that's alarming that he's able to do this at such a young age. The audience's reaction to this film follows a pattern that I find very revealing. The top comment that I see across every major discussion board is, "This was scary," not "it was a great performance." It's the comment that says, "The scariest thing was realizing Nikki was awake the entire time." And over 6,000 people agreed to that comment. And that tells you exactly where Barker landed the emotional weight. Not on the supernatural part, on the consciousness trapped inside it. Would this film work without the awake Nikki mechanic? No. Remove that mechanic and Obsession just becomes a competent supernatural thriller with decent performances, interesting folklore, and some genuinely unsettling imagery. You'd leave satisfied. But Barker isn't making a thriller. He's making an argument. His argument is that obsession, the genuine, consuming, irrational kind, doesn't require supernatural explanation. Bear's behavior before the ritual and after the ritual is consistent. He wanted Nikki, and he found a mechanism to have her. When that mechanism turned out to be causing her suffering, he chose to continue. Like I said before, the Wish Willow is incidental. Barker could have written Bear as a chemist, as a hypnotist, a cult leader. The mechanism doesn't matter, but the choice does. And Curry Barker, at 20 years old, understood that the most disturbing horror films are not about what comes from outside. They're about what we carry in. This is not one of the best horror films to come out in 2026 because it scared me. It's because it made me think about who I was rooting for and why. So until next time, go check out my other videos. Like, comment, most of all, subscribe. But more importantly, don't get too scared. Take care, guys.